Hello everybody, my name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, robot, and I think Loin Streamer pops up every now and then. I didn't mean to do that. And this is Tatum, the American Eskimo. The best puffball in the galaxy. And today I figured, so I would answer the couple of questions that you guys asked before, and then talk a bit about comparing my 3 novels, and then maybe a little bit on some of my not yet public novels. Before we get started, number 1, if you enjoy what I do on this channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. If you would, number 2, if you would like to be featured on this channel, check out the 2 links below with Lemoy and Fresh Meat Feature. And then number 3, if you'd like to check out any of my books, the link is down in the description below, and they should all be at your favorite book retailers. I want to promise a good time, but they are at the very least what they are about themselves. Anyway, a couple months ago at this point, when I was coming near the 1,000 mark, I said if you guys had any questions about me or for me, when it got closer to 1,000 or when I surpassed 1,000, I would answer your guys' questions. And so I got 2 questions from you guys. Well, 2 of you asked questions, and so I'll answer those. And then I'm going to just talk about Dead End Drive, Bodymore, and Boom Boom Boom, with some of the detail that went into those. And there is likely going to be some level of spoiler in those. So if you haven't read them and you don't want them spoiled, then don't follow along in that conversation bit, or skip the books that you don't want the spoilers on. And I'm just really, I think, specifically going to be talking about the motifs and the themes and some of the ideas that went into the creation of those. So the first question was from Mark, and he said, between Dead End Drive, the Boom Boom Boom, and Elephant Box, which is a short story I have, you've mostly written male leads, excluding Bodymore. What draws you to writing men besides the inherent lack of emotion? And if you wanted to read Elephant Box, I think I tried to set up an automatic email that if you subscribe to the email list, the mailing list on Steakhouse Books, you should get an email that contains the Elephant Box if you want to read it. For those of you who don't know, The Elephant Box is a short story. It's a satire on the idea of getting a magical item, of just the finding a magical item trope. And so Frankie gets a box in the mail from his grandpa. It's said to be a magic box from Africa that makes anything you put in it bigger. And then you can just kind of guess where Frankie takes that. Anyway, what draws me to writing male characters, I don't know if I can, that's going to probably take a psychologist to actually psychoanalyze me as to why I have that preference, but I've generally always had the preference for writing male characters, and I also have a bigger preference for also reading male characters and understanding male psychology. I'm much more drawn to reading books about men, and I'm much more drawn to reading psychology books or criminal books about men. One of my favorite authors for nonfiction, Brian Masters, has written a book about Rose West. And as much as I loved the books about Jeff and about Des Nilsson, I'm not super interested in Rose West. And it's just because I don't have the same level of interest in female psychology. And I couldn't tell you why exactly that is. It might have to do with relatability. It might have to just do with the different ways that my head works and, what draws me to what. But I've always had a much bigger interest in men, and I've always written and read books with a higher density of men and a higher focus of men. So I can go way, way far back. So when I first started writing, it was a school project that we were first given for creative writing, where it was pick these words, put them together, and then that'll be the title of the story that you're going to write. I ended up with Sapphire the Blue Pony, and then I wrote that. So from there on, I started looking for anything that I could to write stories about. I guess, it didn't always start out being majority male, because there were times when I was a teen where I had been watching anime, and there were so many animes on TV that were that were harem animes. So you had Tenchi Muyo, and you had Sailor Moon that was on TV. So there were a lot of female-centric TV shows, and so that was what I was more used to. And so then I had a couple of harem-style stories started that were very anime-inspired. I would even say one of my first stories, attempts at a full-length story called Silo, had some inspiration from the Gun Ho Gun that was from Trigun. and that started getting away from it. But shortly around that time, I also started role-playing on MSN groups. And then it went on to Gaia. It was very quickly, actually, I think I was doing the two at the same time, and then I stopped being on MSN groups because I was only in one roleplay on MSN groups. But then on Gaia Online, I just kept joining roleplays. And so what started out in my stories and as my characters is they were androgynous female characters, or they were tomboy female characters, and then they were constantly surrounded by like a cast of men. Like even the story I attempted to write that was like inspired by Twilight, which now if I look at it, it's about 30,000 words and it reads so much like satire. It's ridiculous. But even that, it was like you had the one female character and then you had the reverse harem of like she had 9 brothers and then there was the actual love interest. And so then it was just constantly having the one female character and a million male characters. And the male characters were everywhere and the female characters would kind of be atypical in a way. And so then that developed into being a much more androgynous or tomboyish female character, often with a gender bent name or a name that can go either way, kind of like Joey. And then it became writing a male character who was often confused as being a female character. This came in the form of like the caveman, which was very much like self-inserty in a way because very much self-inspired in a way because it was around the time that I was like 16, 17, and I was starting college. I had to be starting college because I made that kid start college. His name was Cameron. And because my therapist looked at that and he was like, what is this? And I did have problems as a teenager because my dad's divorce messed us all up. Anyway, so I took that to my therapist and the therapist was questioning, oh, so you've got this story where the character is male and gets confused as female. What do you think this means? And so I had a lot of that where where it was a male character being confused as a female character or was on the androgynous of the other side. And then that's fairly quickly developed into just writing straight up male characters that were no longer just effeminate, but they were male characters and then male characters across the spectrum. So really getting into teenage, like 13, 14, I would say is when they started switching into being very female androgynous. Then 14, 15, 16 was when they started to be male androgynous. And then from then on, they just started getting more male in general. And so then I have a spectrum of male characters but so I've always just had this draw to it. And you say, like you've mentioned, you've written male leads excluding B&B. I would still throw B&B into kind of this pattern that I have, because it's still a majority male cast. Sure, you've got Joey as the lead character, but then the only other female character that's featured in that book is Soul, and Soul is technically genderless because she can be whatever it is that the soul she's interacting with actually is. And in this case, since she's interacting with Joey, she appears as Joey's mother. But every other character in that story is a male character, and even when you get into the second book of Bleed More, Body More, the 2 new characters that are introduced, Ralph and KC, are both male as well. And so I just have a tendency and a drive. And so then I'm also working on Ghost Walks now. And that stars Harrison Garcia. Yeah, let's give you some more male characters. So like Dead End Drive is majority male cast, starring male characters. Boom 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 is starring male character, majority male cast. Cain and Abel is... I think there's Crystal. There's his coworker. In Cain and Abel, there's his mother, his stepmother, and his coworkers that are the female characters. Oh, and then his neighbors, I guess. But all of the central characters in Cain and Abel are obviously male because Cain and Abel are gay. And so the main cast so far for the Ghost Walks, which is my magician story set in Nevada, is Harrison Garcia as the main character. Then you've got Harrison's basically adoptive father / guardian, Joe Merrick, or Joseph Merrick. His last name might change. I'm not sure I feel it yet. Then you've got the twins, Lauren and Penelope Dubois. Then you've got Judas Vega. And then you have Savannah, unless her name changes. That's just the prostitute that lives next door to Harrison at the beginning of the book. She may or may not come back. I don't know. That book is still in development. But still, the majority cast here is still male and with another main character. And so, again, I'm going to need a psychoanalysis on somebody that wants to just kind of read my stuff and get to know my stuff and then tell me why I do that. But I just have an affinity towards writing male characters. And I always have. And it's been developing in that direction for over 15 years now at this point, or near 15 years now at this point. And something that you'll also see that I do very often is gender neutral or gender bending names. So you've got situations like Joey. Then you've got Lauren in The Ghost Walks. Then you've got Kelly in Dead End Drive. I'm trying to think. You've got Blake in Boom. And so I do stuff like that a lot where and Ashley. I've used Ashley twice. There's Alexander, Ashley Lamont in Dead End Drive. And then there's Jagger, Ashley Locke in Bodymore. And so I like to do that with names as well. Why? I don't know. It's always just been something that I've always played with the way that I write and the characters that I write. And I could bring you so many more examples if I went back to my Gaia Online test thread with all of my profiles and stuff on it that I've created over the years. Yes. So if anybody is interested in the psychoanalysis of why I write male characters, feel free. Or not just write, but read and prefer male characters. Feel free. And then Jason Furman was the other person that had a question, also said congratulations. So thank you. And good luck on hitting your 500. Can't wait. And he said, first question is, what's your writing schedule / habit? And then second question is, what has been your favorite read so far this year? Killer fiction has been a very interesting read. And it's not enjoyable in the sense of like, I'm like having a really good time with this. But it is interesting, and the details in it I can see being very helpful. I know I'm going to answer these questions backwards apparently, but I can see the details in Killer Fiction by G.J. Schaefer as being very helpful for whenever I return to doing Cain and Abel to get like that feeling of the sexual push and the sexual tension, the intense sexual tension, and some of the details of death, which I'm going to like get on that stylization. I think I can see how I can use that as inspiration. Oh my gosh, what else have I read? Eve the Awakening was super fun to read, but that might be in part because I was reading it with the Loin stream, but it was so fun. Oh my gosh. If you weren't there, you missed out. And I've been reading Dahmer Detective on and off, but those would probably be my top 2 so far. I don't remember everything that I've read this year already, even. I feel like I've read not a lot, but a lot at the same time. So there are those. And then what's my writing schedule / habit like? So this year has been rough. I finished Plead More, Body More in January after like hitting it very, very hard. And then I've been really, really struggling to like get down on the voice of the next character that I'm going to write. I do have to write Bleed More, Body More 3, the 3rd book that comes out next year. But I'm kind of staggering those, which might be to my detriment because that means I'm pulling myself out of Joey's head and then forcing myself into somebody else's head to then pull out of Joey's head again and go back in, or pull out of that head and then go back into Joey's head. So that might be to my detriment to be splitting it up like this. But over the last 2 months, I've had a really difficult time getting into the voice, and I've been switching between working on Cain and Abel and then working on the Ghost Walks. And I switched to the Ghost Walks because I initially had like a vision of how the story was going to start, and I was like, oh, I should start working on this because I can feel it. But then I was missing some of the major blocks to like give this story some logic and to give the story some focus on like how these main characters exist the way that they do. And over the last couple of days, when filming this video, I came up with what that logic actually is and how these characters exist. So I think I've started to fill that in, and so I think I actually have the ability to move the story forward because I think I have the overall structure, theme, interactive items for that. But when I am hardcore, that's just a long way of me getting into like once I click into a project. Once I click into a project, I don't have a daily writing schedule, but I have daily writing requirements. So I don't specifically say I have to write at this time, but I generally set a minimum word count of 1,000 words when it's a first draft, and then like 2,000 words if it's a revision, or 1,500 words if it's a revision, and then anything above that is gravy. So that's not my only what I'm allowed to write that day, but that is the minimum that I'm allowed to write that day. And I try to set the expectations for myself that I have to match the number of words per thousand in a document with the number of days there are in a month. So at the end of this month, I better have at least a minimum of 30,000 words. So that way, even if I miss a day because something is off, I can still make it up by the end as long as I have 30,000 words. And then anything over that is gravy. Now, those last 2 months, I have not hit that goal because I have not had the click into the story. But I think that I've finally hit that, sort of, with the ghost walks. Now I just have to really click into Harrison's personality. And once I really get into Harrison's personality, it's going to really kick off, I think. I can already feel Lauren's personality really there, and I'm starting to get a vibe on what Penelope's role is in the story, because I've started getting the overarching flavor for everything else. Anyway, yeah, so my writing schedule and habits are 1,000 words a day when I'm doing a first draft, 2,000 words a day minimum when I'm doing the second draft. Now, that's not to force me to overwrite or anything. It's just a way to get through the content, to force me to move through the story. Because a first draft, for me, is literally just getting the story down. And revision for me includes totally rewriting the story from the bottom up, with a reference to the old draft on one side and then completely doing the document new on the left. And so I delete stuff as I go. And so I still am putting words into the document. And if by the time I get to the end of the whole document, the end of the story, and I've only written 700 words, usually I try to finish the document the day before if there are only 700 words left before getting to the end of the story. But if I have less than a daily requirement left before I hit the end of the novel, I either finish it the day before and just tack extra words onto that, or I just let myself have a short day of word requirements, because it's not really about the words. The word requirement just allows me to move around when I'm going to be working on a book, and so I don't have to fit it into a time schedule in case my time scheduling moves around for my day. And it also gives me a measurable sense that the book is moving forward, because what really helps me in staying on track with writing a book is having a logistical way to measure results. So for me, sitting down and saying 30 minutes a day or an hour a day isn't necessarily logistical for me, because it doesn't prove that anything is going to get done. However, if I say 1,000 words a day, then at the end of the month, I have 30,000 words now that I didn't have a month ago. And so that's measurable, and it feels less like I'm just digging in a hole that's constantly being filled in and not getting any deeper. That makes sense. So now that I've answered those questions, getting into my 3 books, which are all available, and I'm working on a new thing with Bleed More, Body More that I will hopefully announce once the prototype is sort of ready, and see how that goes. But book 1 that I want to talk about to you guys today is Dead End Drive, which is my satire horror. It's mostly horror because it's got murder involved in it, and there's no sense of it's a survival horror. Okay, that's what it is. And there are some bloody deaths, but everybody's description of horror is slightly different. So what I really like about this story, the complication of the relationships between the different characters and what all they represent. And then also, you might wonder if you've read the book about how the characters are so over the top. One of the main flavors of this book is that money amplifies character. And so when you look at any of these characters, as soon as they come to this house amplifies people for who they are. And Agatha shows that she knows this at the end of the book when she has that letter to Kelly. And says, she tried to change the house, but she never really could. She also shows this in the way that she constantly brought bad boyfriends back to the house, and she knew that the money was always going to corrupt them. None of her boyfriends. So Agatha was a serial dater, and she knew what would happen with her serial dating is during her time, this all plays into how it's going to show up or how stuff is going to show up or be exposed in the Benedict estate. You only get glimpses of this in Dead End Drive. So forgive me if I kind of jump all over the place trying to place some of this stuff. So Agatha lives in Louisiana, and she was going to school. That's when she met Bertrand, who was a Japanese immigrant who came over shortly after World War II, when there was hostile feelings towards Japanese immigrants. But Bertrand fell in love instantly with Agatha's bubbly personality and her voice, and one of their first interactions, so he came over when he was younger, and he was made fun of and picked on and bullied because of his race, obviously because of the tensions. And so he tried really, really hard to Americanize himself. It's how his name's changed to Bertrand Lillygrove, is he tried to Americanize himself, and he tried to learn to speak English as perfectly as possible. And so one of the first interactions that is shown that he has in the book is with Agatha, when she says, I think that your English is even better than mine, because she speaks with the Southern plantation accent, and he just speaks like very proper English. And from that moment, he was just in love with her. She was bubbly, she was giggly, she was sweet, she was so nice. He wanted to be near her, so he became an employee at her estate. And she fell for him back. However, because of the time period, it was actually illegal for people of different races to even live under the same roof, let alone get married. And so he worked on the estate, and they sort of secretly had their affair and their feelings with each other, but ultimately nothing could happen there because not only their races, but also their classes. He was this poor working class gardener at her estate, or a Japanese gardener at her estate, and she was just a rich white woman in this upper society echelon. And so she eventually is going to go in, this is what you witnessed this at the beginning of the Benedict estate, is she goes to London and she comes back with this British man who is Cornelius Beauregard the Third. I think it's the third. And that will eventually be how all of her boyfriends end up being named Beauregard, as she actually marries Beauregard and he becomes her first husband. Now, that's not without Agatha and Bertrand having a love affair, which resulted in Anna, who is the maid of Dead End Drive. So she is the illegitimate love child of the two of them. However, because of the relationship and because of Agatha's own way of dealing with the trauma and the cope and the social stigmas, she pretends that Anna doesn't exist. And Bertrand always just raised Anna as a young girl and let her know that Agatha was her mother, but also was like, treat her with grace. This is the situation. And so Anna grew up wanting to be near her mother and doing whatever she could to be near her mother. Some of the ways that Anna bonded with Agatha invisibly are going to be shown in the Benedict estate, which I think are, like, they're heartbreaking and they're sweet at the same time. So then Agatha went and brought back the Londoner Beauregard and then married him and had a child with him. He's not going to last very long because she actually got pregnant while she was overseas, and I think he gets killed shortly after the marriage. But this child will be Ellie. And so you've got the relationship between Ellie and Anna, who are both daughters of Agatha. And Ellie has had all of the attention and all of the money and all of the acknowledgement, but she is somehow still not her mother's favorite. And she resents Anna for that. And you could see that sort of relationship pick up in the way that Ellie and Anna interact, and the way that Ellie really hates Anna and wants Anna to suffer. She also hates Anna more because Gavin prefers Anna over her, which is just another thing making it feel like Anna is the more legitimate person than her. So really, that book has a huge family and like dynamic going on secretly in the background, which pulls it together. Especially if you get to the end of the book and you see who makes it out at the end, why they make it out at the end, and how everybody else doesn't make it out at the end. What also went into Dead End Drive is that everybody in that book who dies because of their own vices. Like, getting ready for some spoilers here. You got somebody who died from pride because he was like, if I go out, I want to die in a pit of glory. Well, he doesn't die in flames of glory, but it is his pride that gets him in the scope to get murdered. You've got somebody else that loses their temper and they just think that they are on top of it all. You've got somebody who thinks that their manipulation is going to, and their silver tongue, which has helped them all throughout, is going to make it. Somebody who thinks their sexuality is going to make it all the way through. Somebody who thinks that they are cunning, but they're not actually cunning at all and nobody buys it, that's the one that dies first. And somebody who couldn't get out of Alex is so tragic, I think. He is one of my favorite characters, but he straight up says he knows what freaking pisses him off why he's there, why he's angry. It's at being the sidekick to women who have treated him like an accessory for years, and even up to the end. He can't get out of his own way and stop being a girl's accessory, stop being a girl's sidekick, and that is ultimately what gets him. So those are some of the bigger points. There's so much to talk about with Dead End Drive and the different elements in that, and I'm just gonna leave that there. So one of the big themes with Bleed More, Body More is intergenerational trauma, and it's never going to specifically straight up say that, but you have to read between the lines of what happened with Joey, what happened with her father, and exactly where the dead in Body More are coming from. So Bleed More, Body More is a ghost story. And as you go through the story, you learn that the city is filled with anger. Joey is always talking about the anger in the city and the violence in the city and how it infects literally everything, including her own home. And you come to find out that that is the anger passed down, that it's the vengeful ghosts that have died yesterday, that have died whenever in the past, continuing to wreak havoc upon the living. It's all of that which leads up to making it intergenerational trauma, because the bad things that happened to somebody that then led to their death, the dead couldn't let it go, so they came back and now they're terrorizing the living, and it just goes on and on and on. And that continues when you see at the end of Act 2, when Joey dies, is somebody else's trauma comes back and has ruined her life totally. And now she is a vengeful ghost that went back and had to come back because she had unfinished business. And you see her wanting to take it out on people in the way that she took it out on her father, and in the way that she wanted to take it out on Donnie because the hairpin trigger. And you learn more about like why that is in book 2. You get quite a bit more lore in book 2 for how the spirits and the ghosts interact, and what those angry emotions mean and how it manifests in ghosts. But it also very specifically shows in the relationship Joey has with everybody around her when she's still living and when you find out that her father is dead. So about halfway through the book, you learn, while Joey is still alive, you learn that her father died, and it's her father's soul sitting in that chair. Now, throughout the book, Joey is very, very standoffish. She has a difficult time letting her barriers down. She's sarcastic. She's defensive. And there are a lot of people that look at her and go, like, why is anybody friends with this girl? She is so just like, she's damaged goods, really. And you also can look at her and see how she continuously is insistent on returning home to her abusive father. And you might wonder, well, why is this chick returning home to her father who she knows is going to beat her? She climbs out a window to get away from him at some point. And that is also part of the buried in trauma. That is also part of Joey's cope with trauma, and how I like to write about trauma and the way that people deal with trauma, or rather they don't deal with trauma. So with Joey, even though she doesn't remember her father died, every time she steps out that door, she's remembering the time when she was 8 and her father shot herself. And so she steps out that door to go to work, to go to school, to go and meet Jag or Wayland or anybody. And she worries that her dad is going to kill himself because she's got it inside of her. She remembers that feeling of when it happened. She just doesn't remember it happening up until that point because it was a traumatic event that was suppressed, and he was back in the chair. What was she supposed to think? And so she's always had that feeling inside of her that he could die if I leave. And she says this a couple of times, but it's also something that she's internalized. She blames herself for her father's death when she was 8 years old, and she carries that with her into adulthood. She carries that with her into adulthood with her other relationships, which is why you see her constantly pushing away from Jag or pushing away from Wayland, but also saying they have to be the ones to leave because she still remembers what happened when she left her dad. And she also remembers what happened when her mother left her dad, which is what resulted in her father dropping into a drunken stupor that ended up in depression, that ended up in his suicide. So she is still carrying all of that weight around with her, and she hasn't dealt with it. So the story of Body More and the 3-book series that it's going to be is really her acknowledging the trauma, dealing and learning to deal with the trauma. In book 2, she has to let go of a couple of things and to actually acknowledge a couple of things. And then in book 3, she's learning much more about herself and how she interacts with people, and is actually having to acknowledge that there are people that care about her and she is not as alone as she thinks, and that her actions have consequences. Because when you read book one, you're very likely going to be like, she is so impulsive in making such stupid decisions that are self-destructive and actually hurting the people around her, but she doesn't really realize that, and that's something that she learns through the journey of seeing that the people around her do actually care about her. Anyway, so those are some of the bigger themes or ideas that are built into Bleed More, Body More that I just really like. So then when it comes to Boom, 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 this is going to I feel like this is more superficial, but actually maybe it's not. But, because there's nothing like super traumatic about Boom, Boom, Boom. It's a over-the-top satire that has to do with America and Russia and Ukraine. And the really big thing, so number one, okay. It's hard to kind of put these thoughts together. So the first big thing to know about these characters is the relationship between the historical relationship between Ukraine, Russia, and America, which is that usually Ukraine has been kind of a pawn or a movable piece in a tug-of-war fight between Russia and America. It has been basically subjugated in one way or another by either America or Russia, and it's always a dick war between the two of them over who controls it. And so you see that in this book with the way that Americans come into the story and try to take control of Ukraine by making a war happen, like using Ukraine to make a war through Jan, so that they can then attack Russia. But then you also see it with Russia coming in to first at the explosion and then try to justify their invasion. But then at the end, when they're like, we are going to be working with Ukraine in this way, now even Jan's friends say that this is not a great situation, but we're doing what we have to do right now. And so it's a continual push and pull. And all of the characters between Russia, America, and Ukraine are a representative of this long-term relationship of that international war. The other thing is the different relationships between individuals within the country. So with Jan, he lives right by the border, and he sees the Russians as his brothers because he lives right by the border. He's got friends right there on the other side of the border. He's just a regular guy that goes and drinks with them. But then you've got Alex, who lives in Sumy, who works with the government, and he is much more skeptical. And then you've got Boris, who lived through Soviet Russia and whose father obviously lived through the Holodomor. So he's got even more of a skepticism when it comes to Russia because of the relationship specifically with his family. But Jan is only 20, and so he's like bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. He's like, I know these people. They're nothing like that. Things change, Boris. Give people a chance to be different. So all of these people represent different types of relationships with each other on this global stage. You've also got Blake, who becomes the kind of a prototypical, I feel like it was a 2000s rebel, with her blue hair and her pinched nose and her calling her dad, who works for the mainstream media, just sort of a propagandist, okay? Because she's like, you can't be part of the resistance when you're getting paid six figures to be on television spouting talking points for the machine. So you've got all of those going on. And then the skepticism between, say, the Ukrainian from Sumy and the rebel girl in America, when the guy from Sumy doesn't trust anybody but his own family. So you've got all of that going on. And that's something that I'm very proud of for the development of that story. And a side joke that kind of builds into that relationship of how America has always kind of just been dismissive of Ukraine. It's just a piece. They don't really care. Is how the American agents constantly speak to Jan in Russian, number one. In the end, there's a big conversation that also brings out more what the American government thinks of Ukraine. And this is totally different. The other thing in the story is that Ukrainian people, a country's people and a country's government are not the same thing. So that is also a large portion of what is in this story. But you get more of that relationship of what the American government considers Ukraine as in the satire through constantly talking to Jan in Russian, because they constantly keep saying he's Russian, he's from Russia, blah, 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 because they see it as they either own it or it's Russia's pawn to use. And so they don't respect Ukraine at all. The second thing is that Nida, which is the town Jan lives in, is called Nowhere, because I'm literal like that. And the Americans will continuously call it shit all throughout the book. So that's kind of a joke that you may not get unless you have the backstory or you understand what that word means. And it all kind of just plays into this global relationship. I didn't set out for that to be the point. I just started out with a boy who was really good at explosives, who just did it for fun on YouTube. And like, it was that image of the guy yelling with such excitement on this really crappy footage with his crappy upload time to YouTube, and it's just all of that energy. And that's how this story started, and this is where it's ended. And it's coming out soon, and I'm really excited to share it. I'm actually really excited to share all of these stories with you guys, even if they're kind of bizarre or over the top or like not your thing. I know that they're not. I expect people to actually hate everything I do, and so then I'm surprised when people are like, I actually like that. But I'm excited to show these characters and to share these characters, and that includes any of these other ones that I haven't actually done yet. I don't have enough time in a day to get through all of the stories that I want to get through just to share these characters and perspectives for anybody that wants to listen. But if you decide to pick up any of my books, or if you picked them up already, I hope you will enjoy them, or you have enjoyed them. And I am very excited to be working on the Ghost Walks and Bodymore 3, because I think just the elements that'll be put in those that are coming out. Finishing Joey's journey is going to be, I think it's going to be something special. But I would say that because that's my own book. Anyway, that's just some extra information, I guess, about all three of my books. I couldn't pick for you which of these stories is my favorite, because all of them have just something different about them that makes them special for me. But I know that they're not all going to be somebody else's thing. And apparently I pick the hard way to do things by making every story so completely different from the next. Anyway, thank you so much for watching and listening to me just kind of rant about detail aspects of my stories. And I hope you walk away with some sort of like interest or new information or something that you're like, huh, that's okay. And if not, oh well, I'm sorry. But with all that said, thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend, and don't die.
Hello, boomers. My name is Yanananana. In case you didn't know, I'm a YouTuber from Nide, a small town in eastern Ukraine. My family has never really understood what I do in the woods, but all I've ever wanted is to make a better life for us all. Papa always comes home from the mines angry, dirty, and tired. It's a necessary evil to do your job and be in a place that you don't want to be. But I've never wanted to spend my life doing exactly what was necessary of me. Yanni, there's someone here to see you. Americans. Americans? Yeah. Good morning. My name is Tom Cruise. This is my partner Bob Dylan, and we are big fans of your work. You're a couple of boomers. Actually, I'm a Gen Xer, but I digress. We'd like to sponsor you. Sponsor? What does that mean? We'd like to supply you with a couple of things to, help your channel explode. Who is it? Jan Bagan. Good. For a moment, I thought you were one of the Katsap looking for trouble again. What do you mean? They say they're looking for a terrorist. They want to declare war. What point is there to declare war? Human beings are simple creatures. You understand what drives humanity? You understand all human motivation. There's someone out there doing something bigger than your internet videos, and they won't hesitate to use you as a scapegoat. The Russians are begging for a reason to declare us hostile so they can take everything we have. Don't give them that reason, Jan. I should just go home, like Boris said, but I checked the video I posted last night and it has over 500 views. I'm going viral. I don't have a choice. I must produce another video. The jar I'm holding slips out of my sweaty palms. I can't waste any more time and go back for it. I grab my tripod saying sorry, while I keep moving. The jar explodes. I'm deafened by something so loud and powerful it seems unreal. Jan, did you see that? Where the hell have you been? You mean the explosion? Yes. That was me. You needed to not do this today. You don't understand, Alex. I had to do it. I had to get the views. You're going to get yourself killed, Jan. No. They're looking for a terrorist. And how do you look different than a terrorist? I'm not trying to hurt people. Ignorance of war will not stop bullet from straying into your head.